He walked out of a courthouse window and into a sorority house full of sleeping girls. Tonight, you'll see how America's most charming killer turned a broken arm and a smile into a weapon, and why one bite mark at minute 14 finally ended everything. On the night of January 15, 1978, in Tallahassee, Florida, a young woman named Nita Neary returned to the Chi Omega sorority house just before 3 in the morning. As she stepped inside, she heard a thud upstairs, then footsteps. Then she saw a man crouched near the front door, holding a log wrapped in cloth, a ski mask pulled tight over his face. He glanced at her, fled into the night, and vanished down the dark street. Nita did not yet know that she had just locked eyes with Theodore Robert Bundy. She did not yet know that in the rooms above her, 4 of her sisters had been brutally attacked in less than 15 minutes, 2 of them already dying. And she did not yet know that the man with the log had just authored the most concentrated burst of violence in American serial killer history. To understand how a former law student, a political volunteer, a man described by friends as polite, charming, and intelligent, ended up swinging an oak branch in a Florida sorority house, we have to go back. Back to a quiet boy born in a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont, on November 24, 1946. Back to a childhood built on lies. Back to the moment the mask first slipped. Welcome to Dark Cases. Tonight, the full story of Ted Bundy, the charm, the escapes, and the Florida killing spree that finally caught him. Ted Bundy grew up believing his mother, Louise, was his sister. His grandparents raised him as their own. The deception held for years, and when he finally learned the truth, something in him curdled. Acquaintances from his teenage years in Tacoma, Washington, remembered a strange duality. He was bright. He was articulate. He read voraciously. But neighbors also recalled a much younger Ted arranging knives around his sleeping aunt's bed, smiling when she woke in terror. By high school, he was a peeping Tom, prowling suburban streets at night, looking through lit windows at women who did not know they were being watched. He attended the University of Washington in Seattle, where he studied psychology and Chinese. He volunteered for the Republican Party. He worked at a suicide prevention hotline alongside crime writer Ann Rule, who would later describe him in her book, The Stranger Beside Me, as warm, kind, and protective. Ann Rule sat next to a man taking calls from desperate strangers, never suspecting that during his commute home, he was hunting women on dark stretches of highway. Bundy's first confirmed murders, by his own later admission, began in early 1974. The pattern was already forming. Young women, long dark hair, parted in the middle, college students. Disappearances clustered around the campuses of Washington and Oregon. Linda Ann Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Jorgan Hawkins. The names piled up. Witnesses began to describe a handsome man, often with his arm in a sling or a cast, asking for help carrying books or a sailboat to his car. A tan Volkswagen Beetle, a polite voice. A request that seemed harmless because he seemed harmless. On July 14, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park, Bundy made his boldest move yet. In broad daylight, surrounded by thousands of beachgoers, he approached multiple women. Several refused, 2 did not. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund both vanished within hours of each other. Witnesses gave detectives the same description: brown hair, attractive, charming, arm in a sling, introducing himself as Ted. The composite sketch went out across Washington state. Hundreds of tips flooded in. One of those tips named Ted Bundy. His name sat in a file, one of thousands, because nothing about him on paper suggested a killer. He was clean-cut. He was a law student. He had references. The system had no language for what he was. By the fall of 1974, Bundy had moved to Salt Lake City to attend the University of Utah College of Law. The killings moved with him. Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, the daughter of a police chief, Laura Aim, Deborah Kent. The same pattern, the same vanishing, the same silence afterward. Then on November 8, 1974, a young woman named Carol DaRonch made the mistake that saved her life. She accepted a ride from a man claiming to be Officer Roseland, investigating an attempted car break-in at a Salt Lake City mall. Inside his Volkswagen, he tried to handcuff her. She fought. She got the door open, she ran, she lived, and she remembered his face. In August 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol sergeant named Bob Hayward pulled over a tan Volkswagen Beetle that had been driving suspiciously in a residential neighborhood. Inside, he found a ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, an ice pick, rope, and pantyhose with eye holes cut into them. The driver was Ted Bundy. Carol DaRonch identified him in a lineup. He was convicted of her kidnapping in March 1976 and sentenced to 1 to 15 years. But Colorado was already preparing to extradite him for the murder of Karen Campbell, a nurse who had vanished from a hotel hallway in Snowmass Village. And in Colorado, Ted Bundy decided he was not going to stay locked up. On June 7, 1977, while serving as his own attorney, Bundy was granted access to the Pitkin County Courthouse Law Library in Aspen. He was unshackled. He stepped behind a bookshelf, opened a second-story window, and jumped. He landed hard, twisted his ankle, and walked out of Aspen into the surrounding mountains. For 6 days, he hid in the wilderness, stole food from cabins, and tried to flee. He was recaptured only because he made the mistake of stealing a car and driving erratically. He should have been finished. He was not. On December 30, 1977, less than 7 months later, Bundy escaped again, this time from a jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. He had spent months on a starvation diet, dropping weight, hoarding small amounts of money smuggled in by visitors. He sawed a hole in the ceiling of his cell using a smuggled hacksaw blade. On the night of December 30th, while most of the staff were out for the holidays, he climbed up through the ceiling, crawled through the crawl space above the jailer's apartment, dropped down into an empty closet, walked out the front door, and disappeared. By the time anyone noticed he was gone, he was already on a bus headed east. By January 8, 1978, he was in Tallahassee, Florida, renting a room under the name Chris Hagen at a boarding house called The Oak. He had no money. He shoplifted. He stole credit cards. He stole license plates. And somewhere inside him, something that had been straining at the leash for months finally tore loose. 1 week after arriving in Tallahassee, Ted Bundy walked into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. It was approximately 2:45 in the morning on January 15, 1978. He carried an oak log. The front door's lock was broken. He went upstairs. In room number 2, he attacked Margaret Bowman, 21 years old, beating her with the log and then strangling her with a pair of pantyhose. Across the hall, he attacked Lisa Levy, 20 years old. He beat her, strangled her, sexually assaulted her, and bit her so hard on the left buttock that he left deep, distinctive impressions in her skin. Then he moved down the hall. In another room, he attacked Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler. Both survived, but with horrific injuries. The entire attack lasted under 15 minutes. He left the house, slipped past Nita Neary at the front door, and walked back into the Tallahassee night. Less than an hour later, 8 blocks away, he broke into another residence and attacked Cheryl Thomas in her bed, fracturing her jaw and skull. She survived, but suffered permanent hearing loss. Detectives arriving at Chi Omega found a scene so violent that veteran officers were physically sickened. 2 young women dead, 2 more clinging to life, and 1 piece of evidence that would prove crucial: the bite mark on Lisa Levy's body. Photographed in detail, preserved, waiting. Bundy was not finished. On February 9, 1978, he drove a stolen white Dodge van into Lake City, Florida. He spotted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach leaving her junior high school to retrieve a forgotten purse. He posed as a fireman or a concerned adult. He convinced her into his van. He drove her to an abandoned hog shed near the Suwannee River. He killed her there. Her body would not be found for almost 2 months. With the abduction of Kimberly Leach, Ted Bundy had crossed a line that even he had previously avoided. She was a child, the youngest known victim of his entire criminal career, and it was the beginning of the end. 6 days later, on February 15, 1978, a Pensacola police officer named David Lee noticed an orange Volkswagen Beetle driving suspiciously in the early morning hours. He ran the plates. The car was stolen. He pulled it over. The driver tried to fight, tried to flee, struggled with Officer Lee on the pavement. Lee finally subdued him and put him in the back of the cruiser. At the station, the suspect refused to give his real name. He claimed to be Kenneth Misner. It took 2 days for the Pensacola police to realize they had captured the man on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The trial for the Chi Omega murders began in Miami in June 1979. It was televised nationally. It was the first fully televised murder trial in American history. Bundy, again representing himself in part, played to the cameras. He cross-examined witnesses. He flirted with female jurors. He proposed marriage to Carol Boone, a friend who had followed him to Florida, on the witness stand, exploiting a Florida legal quirk to legally marry her right there in court. He smirked. He charmed. He performed. But the prosecution had something Bundy could not flirt his way past: the bite mark on Lisa Levy. Forensic odontologists Dr. Richard Souveron and Dr. Lowell Levine matched the impressions on Lisa Levy's body to Ted Bundy's crooked, distinctive front teeth. The match was presented to the jury in stark, blown-up photographs. It was one of the first major American trials in which bite mark evidence played a decisive role. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty of 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Guilty of burglary. Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death, then famously addressed Bundy directly. He told him he was a bright young man, that he would have made a good lawyer, and that it was a tragedy to the court to see such a total waste of humanity. "Take care of yourself," the judge said. Bundy was convicted again in 1980 for the murder of Kimberly Leach, another death sentence. Florida's electric chair, known as Old Sparky, was waiting. For nearly a decade on death row at Florida State Prison in Rayford, Ted Bundy filed appeal after appeal. He gave interviews, he played games, he hinted at knowing about other murders, dangling information to investigators in exchange for time. As his final execution date approached in January 1989, he finally began to confess. To FBI agent Bill Hagmaier, to detectives from Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho who flew in from across the country. He confessed to 30 murders across 7 states between 1974 and 1978. Many investigators believe the true number is higher, possibly over 100, though that figure remains speculative. He described in flat, detached language how he had stalked his victims, how he had transported their bodies, where he had left them. He blamed pornography. He blamed alcohol. He blamed an entity inside him he called the entity. He never blamed himself. On the morning of January 24, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was strapped into Old Sparky. Outside the prison, a crowd of several hundred people had gathered. They held signs. They sang. They cheered when the lights inside the prison flickered. 2,000 volts of electricity passed through his body. He was pronounced dead at 7:18 a.m. He was 42 years old. Carol Boone, the wife he had married in court, had long since left him and taken their daughter with her. She refused to speak about him publicly for the rest of her life. What remains of Ted Bundy now is not a man, but a warning. A warning about charm as camouflage. A warning about how easily a polite voice and a clean shirt and a broken arm in a sling can disarm the instincts that are supposed to keep us safe. He exploited an era before the FBI had a centralized violent crime database. He exploited the assumption that monsters look like monsters. He exploited the kindness of strangers again and again until kindness itself became a kind of crime scene. The women he murdered were students, daughters, sisters, friends. Linda Healy was studying psychology. Jorgen Hawkins was learning Spanish. Lisa Levy wanted to be a buyer for a department store. Kimberly Leach was 12. They were not props in a killer's story. They were lives interrupted. The forensic legacy of Bundy's case reshaped American investigation. Bite mark analysis, multi-state task forces, the eventual creation of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program known as VICAP, all owe a debt to the chaos he created and the lessons investigators were forced to learn. And yet, decades later, the most disturbing thing about Ted Bundy is not what he did. It is how easily he moved among us while doing it. How many people shook his hand. How many trusted him with rides, with confidences, with their own front doors. The face of evil, it turns out, is often not a face we recognize. It is a face we smile back at. If this case kept you locked in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week on Dark Cases, we dig into the killers, disappearances, and forensic mysteries the headlines forgot. Like the video, share it with someone who loves true crime, and tell us in the comments which case you want next.